Hey guys, tonight we're slipping back in time to ancient Egypt, right before dawn on the Nile. The air is damp and heavy with promise as you squint at the barely brightening horizon, hearing ibis shriek somewhere out in the reeds. You're wrapped in linen that feels scratchy on your sunburnt neck, the smell of mud and old fish clinging to everything. The world seems hushed except for the slow slap of water against docked reed boats and the occasional grunt of workers shifting baskets. You can practically taste the river mist on your tongue. You're here to make beer, not just any beer, but beer fit for gods. You probably won't survive this if you don't learn fast, though the old brewer smirks and says it's idiot-proof. The ground beneath your sandals is cool clay that will turn scorching later. You watch fires being stoked in the dim brewery alcoves, their faint glow licking at storage jars stacked like vigilant sentries. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, tell me your location and local time in the comments. I love seeing how far this sleepy caravan stretches. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You blink at the horizon as the first rays find the river. The Nile is waking with you. Boats bob and creak at the landings, fishers hurling nets in slow, practiced arcs. The water gleams gold for a moment, and you almost forget you're expected to carry heavy baskets full of grain before the sun is properly up. The foreman, whose beard is flecked with yesterday's flour, gestures for you to hurry. You trudge along the mud brick path lined with thorny shrubs that snag at your shins. Someone jokes that the gods invented these bushes to keep you awake, which seems plausible given the half-sleep you're in. The brewery looms ahead, not a single building, but a cluster of shaded workyards, small kill-fired rooms, and giant amphorae lying on their sides like sleeping animals. Your job this morning is simple, the old man says, don't drop anything. You're given a basket of emmer grains, its woven rim digging into your forearms. Emmer, the ancestor of modern wheat, is tough and chewy but sacred for brewing. You notice it's mixed with barley. Egyptians liked this combination for beer because barley alone made for a sour mess, while emmer lent body and sweetness. The foreman mumbles that you're lucky it's not all barley. Historians still argue whether emmer was actually a quality choice or simply what they had too much of in the royal granaries. You watch others measuring the grains, their fingers coated in dust that turns sticky with sweat. The granaries are large, squat buildings nearby with walls that bake hot enough to scorch you if you lean too long. A scribe stands with a wooden tally board, marking who takes what. He's meticulous, like he expects the gods to audit him. You see tiny symbols etched in the clay, inventory of divine favor, really. You shift from foot to foot as your basket gets weighed, making sure you don't tip it over and lose a day's worth of sacred beer potential. A woman next to you is chanting a small prayer as she balances her own load. Something about happy, God of the Nile, blessing the harvest so the beer won't be cursed with mold or poor taste. The old man snorts and says it's for show. But then he crosses himself in the ancient way, tapping his chest and lips. Just in case. You copy him. Better safe than sorry, right? As you shuffle along toward the grinding station, you pass other workers laughing about yesterday's spill. Apparently someone tripped, and barley rained like hailstones onto the foreman's head. He's still salty about it. They joke that the spilled beer-to-be will now appease some minor household god who has a hangover. It's ridiculous enough that you can't help but smile. Your path leads you into a shaded awning of reeds lashed together with fraying cord, casting patterned shadows over the stone querns where the grain will get ground. You glance back at the Nile, always there, always patient. It's the brewery's true secret ingredient, everyone says, even if it stinks of silt and fish guts. But they claim it's blessed, that the gods themselves swirl in its currents. You'll be using that water soon enough, but first, you've got to prep these grains. The foreman finally lets you rest for a second, waving a fly away from his eye. He gestures at the row of querns, each with a deep groove worn from years of grinding. Some are cracked, mended with bronze clamps that gleam dully. You notice an apprentice wiping one carefully, almost reverently. It's not for show, he says, it keeps the old gods happy. Or at least it keeps the boss happy. In the distance you hear the first temple drums sounding, summoning priests to their early rites. The rhythm is slow and sonorous, vibrating through the clay beneath your feet. You close your eyes for a moment and let that sound pull you deeper into this place, this time. The old man leans in conspiratorially and tells you the gods might be watching you right now. Best not to spit on the ground. Best not to curse. Best not to mutter that you'd rather be sleeping in. He says they might just sour the whole batch out of spite. You glance at the sky, expecting judgmental thunderclouds, but it's clear and brilliant, promising heat and sweat. A cat darts between your legs, nearly making you drop your basket. The old man snickers, says the cats are sacred inspectors, if they don't like your work, you're doomed. You're not sure he's joking. As dawn becomes morning proper, the brewery hums with more workers. Fires are being stoked hotter, clay jars tested for cracks, and more scribes appear with their tally boards like silent judges. There's an energy to it. Grim and focused, but with small bursts of laughter and gossip. You set your basket down near the quern. You can feel the coolness of the stone under your palm, rough but worn smooth at the center from decades of grinding. It's time to begin, and as you lean into the first slow, circular grind, you know it's going to be a long, hot, dusty day. But there's something quietly beautiful about it, the ritual, the repetition, the idea that every sweep of your hand is helping feed gods, workers, and yourself. You settle into the rhythm of grinding grain, the stone quern hissing gently as it turns. Your palms press down, warm from friction, while the coarse emmer and barley crackle under the weight. Tiny puffs of dust rise with each circle, coating your arms, tickling your nose. Around you, others do the same in quiet concentration, though every so often someone sneezes explosively, earning groans and half-hearted curses. You glance at the old man overseeing you. His eyes are half-lidded, almost meditative. It's not just crushing grain, he says, his voice low like he's sharing a secret. It's preparing an offering. You smirk at that, but you can't help noticing the care everyone uses despite the mess. They tap the sides of their querns to make sure the flour gathers properly. They sift for pebbles with methodical precision. Grain is life here. Emmer with its stubborn husk requires patience. If you rush, you get uneven meal that ruins the mash. The barley's easier but gives beer a sharpness the priests dislike if it's too dominant. Your fingers are soon caked in sticky sweat dust. You're assured it's part of the authentic experience. A scribe wanders by, checking baskets and making notations with an expensive reed pen. He eyes your pile critically, muttering something about short waits before moving on. Historians still argue whether these scribes were mostly bureaucratic tax agents or religious record keepers. It seems they were both, which is exactly as annoying as it sounds. Beside you, a teenage boy is humming a hymn to Atha, the goddess of music and love, but also of beer. He says she invented it to soothe the bloodlust of Ra's slaughter. You ask if that's true, and he just shrugs. It's what they tell us, he says. Then he resumes humming, off-key, which seems fitting for a goddess who liked tipsiness. The grinding is monotonous. You lean your weight into it, sweat dripping onto the stone. But there's something satisfying about watching the grains transform. The gritty sound gives way to softer scraping as you make progress. You develop a rhythm, push, circle, scrape. Your arms burn, but your mind drifts. Occasionally, there's a muttered curse as someone cuts a finger on a chipped edge or spills precious meal. You all pretend not to laugh when it happens to the foreman himself, who tries to blame the quern spirits. Someone tells a joke about making an offering to appease them by throwing the foreman in the Nile. Another worker claims they once found a tiny scarab fossil in the grain and kept it for luck. He pulls it from a cord around his neck to prove it, though you suspect he carved it himself. He insists it keeps the beer from souring. The old man just rolls his eyes. The smell of crushed grain thickens in the heat. It's rich, grassy, a bit bitter. You feel it in your sinuses like warm hay. A few cats prowl close, eyes glinting, looking for mice or dropped morsels. No one chases them away, they are sacred after all. One curls near your feet, purring, as if judging your technique. As the sun climbs, the shade recedes, and the work grows hotter. Sweat trickles down your back in rivulets. The woman beside you fans herself with a bit of woven reed, muttering about how the gods clearly never did any grinding themselves. That gets a snort from the old man, who claims they're too busy getting drunk on the finished product. You notice the steady piles of flour accumulating. The foreman tests handfuls, letting the powder sift through his fingers. He grunts approval if it feels fine enough. Coarse flour is no good for beer, it traps water badly and ferments unevenly. He says too many lumps invite mold, which everyone fears. You shudder, imagining an entire batch spoiled after days of work. The boy with the hymn starts chanting again, this time adding claps to keep his tempo. The sound is hypnotic. You catch yourself falling into sync with him, your arms moving like clockwork. It almost feels like prayer, though you're careful not to say so aloud. Near the edge of the awning, an argument breaks out about who has to carry the next finished batch to the mash area. They settle it with a game of knucklebones, the loser groaning dramatically as he hoists the heavy basket. He makes a show of pretending to stagger like a drunk, eliciting real laughter. Even the scribe watching from the shadows cracks a grin before pretending to scowl. When your pile is deemed ready, you brush off your arms, coughing a bit at the cloud of dust. The old man claps you on the back hard enough to make you stumble. Not bad, he says. You might not ruin it after all. High praise, you suppose. You help gather the flour into baskets lined with linen to keep it from blowing away. The linen is worn, stained with years of use, and smells faintly of old barley. You tie the basket shut and help the others stack them near the path that leads to the brewing area. Looking over the baskets, you realize this is sacred work, even if it's grubby. This flour will feed gods, pharaohs, workers on grand tombs. It will become offerings burned on altars and rations in dusty huts. The Nile has blessed these fields, the sun has baked them, and your sweat has helped transform them. It's hard not to feel a little reverence as you straighten up, wiping your brow. A breeze stirs, cool for a moment, carrying the scent of the river and the promise of the next task. You know you'll have to carry these baskets to the next station, but for now, you steal a breath, eyes half-lidded against the glaring sky, letting the world slow and blur at the edges. One of the cats yawns, revealing sharp teeth. It seems to judge you one last time before padding off toward the brewing yard, tail held high. You follow slowly, already feeling the ache in your shoulders but also a peculiar satisfaction. You hoist the basket onto your shoulder, wincing at the weight that digs into bone. The path to the mash yard is a winding dirt track littered with hoof prints and discarded reeds. Every step kicks up pale dust that clings to your sweat, turning you into a walking sculpture. You pass other workers, their faces set in grim determination or slack with fatigue. A donkey brays loudly from somewhere nearby, startling a scribe who nearly drops his tablet. You smother a laugh. The old man behind you mutters, even the donkey thinks this work is beneath it. You shake your head, adjusting your load so it doesn't topple. Ahead, you see the mash yard shaded by massive woven reed canopies, their tops rustling in the hot wind. Clay vats, big as bathtubs, are sunk into the earth in neat rows. The foreman waves you forward, barking that you're late, though you're pretty sure he says that to everyone. You set the basket down with a grunt of relief. Your spine cracks like old papyrus. Nearby, another team is already at work, mixing flour and water in one of the vats. The smell hits you instantly, earthy grain, wet and yeasty, with an undertone of Nile water that reminds you uncomfortably of dead fish. You peer into one vat, watching a young man stirring with a long wooden paddle. The paste is thick, pale, and oddly hypnotic as it slurps around the paddle. Don't stare too long, the old man warns, voice low. You'll start seeing the gods' faces in the foam. You snort at that, but you keep moving. Your job is to dump the flour in carefully, too fast and it clumps. You lean the basket slowly, feeling the hot sides against your arm as the grain falls in puffs and cascades. You're told to stir with your free hand to keep the slurry smooth. It's weirdly soothing, the way the grain disperses, the lumps dissolving with each swirl. The workers trade quiet jokes about whose batch last week grew a layer of green fuzz. They say even the temple cats wouldn't go near it. Historians still argue whether these molds were sometimes deliberate, primitive but functional antibiotics, or simply an ever-present hazard. The scribe wanders over, eyes sharp. He asks you your name, you lie, just for fun, and writes it down anyway, expression unreadable. He says the gods see all mistakes. You roll your eyes once he's gone. As you stir, you notice the water used is not quite clear. The Nile's gift is abundant but murky. They let it settle in big jars to reduce the worst silt, but there's always a bit of grit. You feel it between your fingers. The old man claims its texture. Once your batch is mixed, you're shown how to check consistency. Not too runny or it won't ferment well. Too dry and it cracks as it dries in the sun. You pinch the mash, letting it ooze. It's a bit like modern sourdough starter, but grainier and with the weird, swampy edge of the Nile clinging to it. Next comes shaping. Workers scoop big handfuls of the slurry onto flat baskets lined with palm fibers. They pat them into squat, thick loaves, leaving finger grooves like signatures. You do the same, fingers pressing carefully. The woman next to you hums as she works, a lilting tune you catch yourself swaying to. She explains this step is crucial. These proto-loaves will be part-baked later. If they're too wet inside, they stay raw and encourage rot. Too dry, and they don't dissolve properly in the fermenting water. You nod sagely, as if you know what you're doing. A boy runs past with a stack of shaped loaves wobbling dangerously. He trips, predictably, and they slap into the dirt. He scrambles to recover them, cursing under his breath in words that'd maketh the blush. The old man sighs theatrically, proclaiming the gods will drink that batch extra muddy as punishment. Another older worker says they used to use date juice to sweeten the mash, when they could afford it. He misses the smell, though he admits it drew bees like, well, bees to honey. Now it's mostly grain and river water, though a temple batch might get the good stuff. Historians still debate whether these beer loaves were standardized recipes or just guesswork guided by generations of practice. Watching everyone here, it feels both methodical and improvisational at once. You see 100 variations in the thickness, the care in shaping, the quick slaps to flatten the tops. You catch the old man shaping his loaf with delicate precision, murmuring a blessing under his breath. You tease him about being superstitious. He says it's not superstition if it works. Besides, he claims, once he skipped the prayer and the entire batch went sour. You raise an eyebrow. He glares back until you both crack smiles. When the loaves are ready, they're carried to the clay ovens lining one edge of the yard. The ovens are squat, with narrow mouths glowing faintly red even in daylight. The heat hits you like a slap as you approach. Workers toss scraps of palm fronds in to stoke the fires, smoke billowing in lazy curls. The loaves go in carefully. They're not meant to bake all the way, just enough to hold shape and partially cook the starches. You watch through squinting eyes as flames lick the walls. It's mesmerizing in a dangerous way. The foreman yells at you to keep moving before you catch fire yourself. You help load trays, then back off to watch the baking. It's a weirdly communal moment, everyone standing in the heat, eyes watering from smoke, trading jokes to pass the time. A woman says the gods must be drunk all the time if this is the effort it takes to brew for them. Finally, the foreman calls time. The loaves are raked out with long poles. They're steaming, cracked on top, smelling both delicious and faintly acrid. You carry trays to a cooling area, stacking them carefully. It's hard not to think they look like giant cookies. As you stand there, wiping sweat and soot from your arms, you realize you're proud of your lumpy, uneven, but unmistakably beer-bound loaves. They're not pretty, but they're the next sacred step. The old man claps you on the shoulder, croaking, one step closer to getting the gods properly sloshed. You laugh, coughing from the smoke, and feel a breeze finally cut through the heat. The Nile glimmers in the distance, patient and eternal, promising water for the next stage. You wipe your brow with the edge of your tunic, crusted now with flour dust and oven soot. The half-baked loaves are stacked and cooling, warm enough to scent the air with a strangely inviting blend of roasted grain and wet earth. You watch the steam rise in hazy columns, shimmering in the heat like ghostly offerings already drifting to the gods. Someone jokes that the smell alone should earn you divine favor. Another quips back that it's more likely to summon hungry crocodiles from the Nile. You snort at that, glancing toward the distant, lazy glint of water. It's time to move the cooled loaves to the soaking vats. You gather them into baskets lined with rough linen, careful not to crush them. Even half-baked, they are fragile. Each one is slightly different, some wider, some taller, all with the fingerprints of their maker. There's an unspoken competition over whose loaves stay intact. The vats are huge clay-lined pits partly buried in the earth, shaded by thatched awnings to blunt the worst of the sun. You walk slowly, basket digging into your hip, as you follow a narrow dirt path worn smooth by countless feet. The ground is hot enough to burn soles through thin sandals. When you reach the vats, you're hit with the smell of previous batches fermenting. It's ripe. A pungent, sweet-sour aroma that is somehow both inviting and revolting. Your stomach turns and growls at the same time. The foreman grins at your expression. "Ah, that's the perfume of civilization," he says grandly. "The gods love it, so you will too." You roll your eyes but admit there's something comforting in its consistency, like the smell of wet hay or old bread. You tip your basket gently, letting the loaves plop into the water. They bob at first, resisting immersion like stubborn toddlers. You're told to use a paddle to push them down until they begin soaking properly. The water turns cloudy immediately, strands of dough and grain swirling like ghostly tendrils. The woman next to you is humming as she works, tapping the paddle against the edge of the vat in rhythm. She says it's good luck to keep the water moving. You're skeptical but follow suit, listening to the wet slosh. Historians still argue whether this soaking step was always supervised by temple staff or sometimes left to village brewers improvising. Watching the scribes hover with their tablets, you guess it depends how much tax was involved. The old man stands by you, nodding approvingly at your cautious paddling. "Gently," he says. "Too rough and you break the loaves completely. We want mush, not sludge." It's a fine distinction, you discover quickly. You press one loaf with the paddle, watching it split slowly, releasing dense, pale threads of half-baked starch. The water thickens, turning into a viscous soup. You stir in slow circles, the paddle scraping the bottom. It's hypnotic. You catch yourself zoning out, jerking awake only when the old man pokes your side with his own paddle. He claims that in the old days, they'd sing hymns to Uther and Bastet while stirring. Not because it helped fermentation, he admits, but because it kept people from falling asleep at the vat and drowning. You laugh, but you glance at the water, imagining ancient brewers snoring face down in the mash. The scribe moves in to check progress, poking the soaking mass with a measuring stick and making notes. He mutters something about temple quality standards. You make a show of saluting him, which earns a glare and an order to keep it consistent. Nearby, another worker grumbles that last year they tried adding figs to a batch to sweeten it, but the priests complained it was too innovative. Now they just stick to the classic: grain, water, patience, prayers. Maybe a bit of date paste if they're lucky. You're told to skim off floating chaff and husk bits with a woven scoop. It's strangely satisfying, like fishing for edible debris. You flick the scraps onto a compost heap buzzing with flies. One lands on your nose and you slap at it too hard, splashing yourself with mash water. The old man nearly chokes laughing. You glare at him, flicking more mash water in revenge. He claims you're offending the gods. You suggest the gods might appreciate a sense of humor. He waggles a paddle menacingly in response. A donkey brays again in the distance, the sound carrying over the low murmur of laborious chatting. Someone complains about the heat, another points out it's cooler than last week, which just gets a chorus of groans. You all keep stirring. Eventually the foreman calls a break. You lean your paddle against the vat, arms aching. You sit on a clay bench nearby, feet kicking up powdery dirt. You're handed a small cup of weak beer, the everyday ration, barely alcoholic, sour but cold. You sip gratefully, letting it dribble down your chin in defiance of dignity. As you drink, you watch the vat steaming slightly in the sun, the mixture inside thickening, darkening as the grain dissolves. You know it'll take hours to fully break down. The smell deepens, rich and funky. The old man leans back beside you, eyes closed, humming tunelessly. He says this part of brewing is like waiting for the Nile flood, inevitable but beyond your control. You think that's oddly poetic for someone who just laughed at you for getting splashed. Historians still debate how standardized these soaking times were. Some recipes suggest hours, others days. Here, it depends on the foreman's mood, the weather, the whims of scribes, and maybe divine guidance, or so they claim. As your break ends, you stand with a groan, wiping your hands on your tunic. The old man slaps your back, muttering something about making the gods' favorite porridge. You snort at that and pick up your paddle again, ready to stir the slow swirl of dissolving bread. The sun slants lower, casting the yard in hazy gold. The smell of fermenting mash grows stronger, somehow comforting. You take a deep breath, sigh, and get back to work, stirring carefully as the Nile breeze drifts over you, carrying the promise of the next step in your long, sleepy task. You feel the sun press down like a hand on your head, heavy and insistent. The Nile wind does its best to help, but it's sluggish now, as if it too has grown tired of moving through this heat. You're still at the vat, hands sticky with the mixture of dissolved loaves and warm river water. The air is thick with the scent of fermenting grain, sweet, sour, a little swampy. But there's something else now. A tangy note that tickles your nose and tells you something is happening inside the vat, quietly and invisibly. Fermentation has begun. This is the part they call letting the gods do their work, and honestly, you kind of see why. You're not entirely sure what's going on inside that bubbling, thick stew of soggy bread, but it's doing something. You can hear it, soft crackles and pops, faint fizzing like a distant rain. You half expect the scribe to lean in and whisper, "Shush, it's dreaming." The old man from before smirks as you stare into the frothy surface. "It's alive now," he says, half joking. "Keep it warm, keep it stirred, and keep your fingers crossed." You ask what happens if it doesn't ferment right. He shrugs. Then the gods get grumpy and the temple priest blames you. Or the donkey. Depending on the day. As you stir, the color deepens. What was pale beige now shifts to a soft brown, flecked with bubbles. The smell changes too, richer, more sour, like wet grain mixed with the memory of fruit. Historians still argue whether wild yeast from the air or leftover from old batches was the primary agent of fermentation. Looking at this bubbling vat, it's hard to imagine anyone could ever be certain. You just know the magic works. Usually. You watch a few workers add dried herbs to one of the vats. A blend of coriander and maybe something minty. They say it helps the taste and may appease the sky gods. Another vat gets no herbs, for contrast, the foreman says. Or maybe because the herb basket was mysteriously empty. Again. You help carry hot stones from a fire pit nearby and gently lower them into the edges of one vat. It's an old trick to keep the mash warm during cooler winds, and it hisses dramatically when each stone touches the liquid. You half expect a genie to appear in a cloud of barley-scented steam. One of the younger workers tries to speed up fermentation by stirring too quickly and nearly tips the whole vat. The scribe scolds him, and someone else mutters that his last batch came out so flat even the cat turned it down. You laugh, but it reminds you how delicate this whole process really is. A few degrees too cold, or a misstep in timing, and the beer could end up sour in the wrong way, or worse, fizzy with gas but no taste. You peer into your own vat again and watch as the foam grows slightly thicker, forming delicate rings near the edges. You stir gently, feeling resistance now, as if the mixture itself has gained a will and doesn't like being pushed around. The woman from earlier dips in a reed cup and sips a tiny taste. She makes a face, then nods. "Still young," she says. But she's waking up. You try a sip too, it's strange. Faintly sweet, tangy, and watery, with a hint of bread. Definitely not drinkable yet. But it's promising. You remember what the old man said earlier about praying to Bastet during the fermentation. He's now doing just that, sitting cross-legged beside the vat with a bit of incense and what looks like a dried fish bone tied to a string. You nudge him and ask if the gods really care. He opens one eye and says, the beer doesn't know who made it. But the gods do. Then he goes back to muttering. You decide not to argue. Some of the older women joke that in their village, fermentation success was determined by whether or not the brewer was on good terms with her mother-in-law. No one ever got sick from my beer, one says proudly. Except maybe my husband. But that was probably the lentils. A child runs past with a clay doll, trailing laughter. Even in this serious work, life continues, light, chaotic, full of small moments that keep the mood afloat. You sip a little more from your vat and almost smile. It's slightly better now. Historians are still unsure how much alcohol these ancient beers actually contained. Some say they were strong enough to make a priest stumble. Others insist they were weak, like grainy soup with a buzz. What's clear is that it wasn't just for fun, this was sacred stuff. Ritual, sustenance, offering, and art. After hours of watching, stirring, and waiting, the foreman finally nods. It's time. The fermentation has reached the stage they want. You help cover the vats with linen sheets, tied down with twine and pebbles to keep bugs and dust out. The linen smells faintly of last week's batch and a hint of smoke. You smooth it down gently, like tucking a baby to sleep. And now, you wait. Again. This part could take another day or more. The mash needs to settle, finish its bubbling, and clarify. You've heard some temple brewers add crushed dates or even honey at this point to adjust the flavor. Your batch gets none, it's going to be classic and unadorned. You step back, wipe your hands on your tunic, and look over the field of vats like a sleepy general surveying a quiet battlefield. The air is still warm, heavy with scent. The workers begin drifting off for food or shade. The old man stands beside you, arms crossed. It's a good one, he says quietly. Strong bubbles. Warm color. You might just please the gods. You look at him, and for a moment he seems serious, proud, even. Then he snorts. Or you'll poison the priest and end up working in the dung pit for a month. Who's to say? You groan, but you're smiling. The Nile breeze finally picks up again, fluttering the linen sheets on the vats like sails on tiny boats. You sit down in the dust, tired but content, as the scent of young beer fills the warm evening air. The night is heavy with heat when you finally doze off near the vats, your back against a worn clay wall, the linen covers rustling gently in the breeze. When dawn breaks, it's with the roar of donkeys braying and workers coughing themselves awake. You rub sleep from your eyes and stretch until your joints pop. The fermentation has been left to do its slow work in the cool hours. Now, as the sun peaks over the river, it's time to check the results. The old man is already there, tapping the linen cover like he's waking an old friend. He pulls it back carefully, revealing the vat surface. The foam is thinner now, the color darker. You can see swirls of liquid separating from the thicker grained sludge at the bottom. He leans in and inhales deeply. You hesitate, but you follow suit. It's rich, sour-sweet, earthy. Definitely beer now, well, proto-beer. You grin despite the early hour. One of the scribes is watching you both, stylus poised. He's determined to record every stage of this brew, even if you suspect he doesn't know what half of it means. When you ask him what he's writing, he mumbles something about acceptable clarity thresholds and temple requisition forms. Historians still argue whether these records were genuine recipes or just bureaucratic bragging. You glance at the scribe's squiggles and guess the latter. The next step is decanting. You work with the others to slowly siphon off the clearish liquid near the top of the vat. It's an art form, not stirring up the sediment at the bottom. The trick is to use thin reeds bound together to form a sort of natural straw. You suck carefully, spit the first mouthful, full of foam, and get the liquid flowing into big ceramic jugs. It's warm, of course. No ice in ancient Egypt. But you're told that warmth helps blend the flavors. You mutter that you'd prefer a cool pint and earn a whack from the old man's reed. The decanting is slow work. Your knees ache from crouching. Your fingers grow numb gripping slick reeds. You try to keep the siphon steady, but a sudden gust of wind dumps dust across the top of the vat. You curse, but the old man shrugs. Extra minerals. The gods will cope. Nearby, two workers are arguing whether the beer tastes better when strained through linen or papyrus mesh. One insists linen leaves fewer husks, while the other swears papyrus adds a subtle earthy note. Historians still debate whether such methods were standardized or personal flair. You decide it's probably both. You finish your siphoning and sit back. The jug is heavy, sloshing with murky brown liquid. You hold it to your nose. It's beer, all right, thick, yeasty, fragrant. You wouldn't call it refreshing, but you can see how it might make temple feasts lively. The old man gestures you over to the final vat, where they're blending the decanted liquid from all the other batches. This is the temple's batch, the one that will be offered to the gods in ritual. It has to be the best. You stand on a low platform to pour yours in. The big vat is nearly full, a swirl of browns and tans with a foam scum that you carefully skim off. It's oddly beautiful in a rustic way. The scribe records every jug added, counting them aloud in a sing-song voice that quickly becomes annoying. Someone mocks him under their breath and gets a death glare. You dip a small cup and sip. It's sour, malty, surprisingly complex. It leaves a tingling on your tongue. The old man tries it too and grunts approval. Better than last festival's, he says. That one tasted like goat. You don't ask how he knows what goat tastes like. As the final jugs go in, you watch the workers add a bit of date syrup. Just enough to round the flavor. Not all batches get this, but temple offerings do. They deserve something special. The syrup gleams like molten amber in the morning sun, swirling into the beer in graceful eddies. You're given the honor of stirring. You take the long wooden paddle and move it slowly through the liquid, feeling its weight shift around you. It's thicker than water but smooth. The smell is heady now: bread, fruit, sourness, life. Gentle, the old man warns. This isn't porridge. You comply, moving the paddle in slow figure eights. You catch your reflection in the dark surface, smeared with sweat, dirt, and pride. Historians still debate whether these temple batches were truly for the gods alone or if the priests threw a little party after the rituals. Given the winks and nudges among the workers, you have your suspicions. Someone starts a chant, a low, rhythmic hum meant to honor Atha, the goddess of joy, music, and beer. Others join in, voices blending with the rustle of reeds and slap of sandals on clay. You hum too, feeling oddly moved. The sound vibrates through your chest and into the paddle, rippling the bee's surface. The scribe records even this, though you doubt he knows how to notate off-key humming. As the chant fades, the foreman claps his hands. It's time to transfer the final mix to transport jars, tall, slim-necked amphorae sealed with clay stoppers. You help hold the funnel as others pour carefully. It's slow, messy work. Beer dribbles down the sides, leaving sticky trails that will draw every ant in Egypt if you're not careful. You wipe them away with a damp cloth, making a face. When the jars are full, you help seal them with fresh clay, pressing it firmly with your thumbs. Your nails get packed with mud, but it feels satisfying. Final. Official. You glance at the row of sealed amphorae. They stand like soldiers ready for inspection, each marked with a symbol indicating the temple it's destined for. The old man leans against one and says, "The gods will be pleased." Then he sniffs his fingers and adds, "And so will the priests." You both laugh, weary but satisfied. The dawn has fully broken now, painting the river gold. The breeze off the Nile smells of mud, reeds, and possibility. You stretch, feeling every sore muscle protest, but you know you've helped make something sacred. Even if it's sticky, sour, and might give you a headache if you drink too much. You wipe your hands on your tunic and grin at the waiting donkey carts that will haul the jars away. Another batch complete. Another offering prepared. And it's only sunrise. You squint into the rising sun, feeling the heat climb with every passing minute. The carts creak and sway as they're loaded with the sealed amphorae, each stamped with careful symbols so no temple can accuse another of stealing the good batch. You help lift a jar, careful to balance it on your shoulder, its weight pressing into your collarbone. The clay is still cool from the night, but the beer sloshes warmly inside, a little wave that reminds you of the river. You grimace, shift it slightly, and trudge toward the cart. Nearby, the old man grumbles about the youth being weak these days, even as he struggles with his own jar. You offer to help, and he glares at you like you just insulted his ancestors. Once the last jar is loaded, the foreman does a quick head count. He ticks names off on a strip of papyrus, then double-checks the number of jars. Bureaucracy has always been a hallmark of temple operations, you suppose, even if half the symbols are birds and snakes and no one agrees on which bird means what. Historians still argue whether these tallies were strict records or polite fiction to please temple scribes. Watching the foreman skip a jar and wink at the scribe, you lean toward the latter. The caravan sets off slowly, wheels grinding into the dry earth. You fall in behind, your feet raising little puffs of dust. The Nile gleams off to the side, deceptively calm. It's a long walk, but no one seems eager to hurry. The old man says beer needs a slow journey or it gets insulted and goes flat. You try to argue that beer is not a cat, but he shushes you. A priest's assistant joins your little procession, fanning himself with an ostrich feather fan that's seen better days. He warns you all not to shake the jars too much, it's disrespectful to Uther. You suspect it's also to avoid cleaning up beer-soaked donkey carts. As you walk, the old man starts describing other times he's delivered beer to temples. Once, the jar cracked and they spent an hour trying to patch it with river mud. Another time, a crocodile blocked the ford and they lost half a day waiting for it to get bored and leave. He insists he once bribed the beast with a dead chicken. You raise an eyebrow. He swears on his mother's grave. Someone else asks if he's sure it wasn't just a log. He glares and says, "Logs don't eat chickens." The path winds closer to the river. You smell water, mud, lotus blossoms, and the faint whiff of donkey droppings. At one point, you pause at a small shrine beside the road. A battered limestone stela leans at an angle, carved with a scene of a goddess holding a beer jar. You all stop, offer a moment of silence, or what passes for it when someone sneezes, someone else curses the flies, and the old man farts grandly. You mutter a quick prayer anyway, asking for no broken jars and minimal donkey attitude. When you start walking again, the conversation drifts to old recipes. One woman claims her mother used to add juniper berries to beer for the elite batch. Another says they used crocodile dung to seal jars airtight, which gets groans all around. Historians still debate whether animal products were genuinely used in beer production or if these are just tall tales passed down to prank apprentices. Looking at your traveling companions, you wouldn't be surprised either way. You near the temple district at last, and the road widens, packed harder from years of feet and hooves. The walls rise up in whitewashed splendor, reflecting the sun so brightly you have to squint. You see painted columns, banners flapping in the Nile breeze, and hear the distant sound of chanting. The donkeys seem unimpressed, snorting at the sudden crowd of priests, assistants, and workers. You help unload the jars, your arms trembling from fatigue. The priests examine each one with a gravity that suggests they're selecting jewels rather than booze. They tap, sniff, peer at the stoppers. One even tilts a jar, listening to the slosh like it's a prized musical instrument. You exchange glances with the old man. He rolls his eyes and mouths, "Artists." Still, the temple staff pay well, and they hand over strings of copper pieces in exchange for the delivery. The foreman counts them twice, nods in satisfaction, then waves you to help stack the payment carefully in a locked box. After the last jar is accepted, you're given a simple meal in the temple courtyard, flatbread, lentil stew, and, fittingly, a cup of last month's beer. It's cooled in a clay pot sunk in wet sand, so it's the closest thing to refreshing you've had all day. You lean back against a column, the shade delicious on your sweaty skin. The beer is sour, grainy, and a little fizzy. It's not the best you've ever had, but it tastes like victory after the haul. The old man raises his cup in mock solemnity. "To the gods," he says. "To the gods," you echo, grinning, You let the sounds of the temple wash over you, chants, flutes, the slap of sandals on stone. The beer hums in your veins, warm and soft. You close your eyes for a moment, content, knowing the hardest part of the job is done. But the foreman's voice breaks in, "Don't get too comfortable. We're due back at the brewery before sundown." You groan but haul yourself up, already bracing for the return trip. The Nile breeze teases your hair, cooler now that the sun is higher. And as you fall in line for the march back, you can't help but think, tomorrow, you'll be doing this all over again. The afternoon sun drapes itself over the Nile's shimmering surface as you trudge back toward the brewery, the air heavy with dust and distant laughter. Your legs ache, but the rhythm of your footsteps becomes almost meditative. You imagine the river flowing steadily nearby, calm, patient, just like the beer you helped craft. On the way, the old man launches into a story about how beer was not just a drink but a form of daily currency in ancient Egypt. You learn that workers on the Great Pyramids were often paid in rations of beer, sometimes more eagerly anticipated than bread. Better than gold to a thirsty man, he jokes, nudging you with an elbow. You swallow a tired smile. It's true enough, beer was fuel and fellowship, sacred offering and common comfort. Historians still debate the exact proportions of barley versus emmer wheat used, but everyone agrees the drink was vital in temple rituals and everyday life alike. As the caravan moves along, you notice small roadside shrines dedicated to Atha, the goddess of joy and brewing, each adorned with tiny clay jars. Passers-by pause briefly to leave offerings, dates, flowers, or a splash of beer from their own containers. You dip a finger in a communal jar and taste a thin, sweet liquid that tastes faintly like the river itself. The old man explains how these roadside blessings served as quiet reminders of the goddess's watchful presence. "You never know when she's listening," he says with mock seriousness. You glance around, half expecting a divine wink. Meanwhile, a young apprentice trips over a loose stone, spilling a little beer onto the ground. The group chuckles softly, even the old man can't resist a smile. "She's thirsty too," he says, gesturing to the soil soaking up the precious liquid. You think about how much patience the brewing process requires, from soaking and malting grains to slow fermentation. It's a far cry from today's industrial churning. This is craft, care, and ritual woven together. The chatter turns to debate, whether the ancient brewers used natural wild yeasts or relied on reused starter grains. Some insist it was a mystical gift, others say it was just good timing and luck. You suspect it was a bit of both, and the truth is probably lost like many things buried beneath the sands. Ahead, the silhouette of the brewery comes into view, its mud brick walls glowing warm in the late afternoon light. You breathe in the familiar scent of grain, yeast, and fresh mud, feeling a strange mixture of relief and anticipation. The day's labor is almost done, but the brew story is far from over. The brewery's courtyard buzzes softly with the sound of workers cleaning tools and emptying spent grain bags. You drop your load and lean against a shaded wall, feeling the warmth soak through your linen tunic. The smell of fermentation lingers, sweet and slightly sour, a comforting reminder of the day's work. You watch as a group of women carefully separate grain husks from malted barley, their hands swift and practiced. One hums a tune, a simple melody that you imagine has echoed through these walls for centuries. The rhythm is soothing, like a lullaby for tired bodies. Nearby, a boy carries a basket filled with freshly baked barley bread, meant to accompany the evening's communal meal. You catch a whiff of the crusty, warm loaf and wonder how the flavors of bread and beer might have mingled on ancient tongues. The old man sidles up, pulling you aside with a conspiratorial grin. "Want to see the secret ingredient?" he whispers, as if revealing a royal mystery. You nod eagerly, curiosity piqued. He leads you to a shadowy corner where a small heap of dates glistens in a woven basket. "These," he says, "are what give our temple beer that little extra sweetness. Not everyone uses them, but the priests demand it." You pick up a date, its sticky flesh clinging to your fingers. You bite into it and taste the deep, sugary richness, a stark contrast to the sour beer you've been sipping. The combination seems strange, but you trust the old man's taste. As you return to the brewing vats, he explains how dates were often added during the later stages of fermentation, enhancing flavor and increasing alcohol content. This practice varied regionally, with some brewers favoring other fruits or even herbs. Historians still argue about the exact role of these additives, whether they were primarily for taste, preservation, or symbolic meaning in ritual. You consider how much ancient brewing was part chemistry, part magic, and part storytelling. The sun lowers, casting long shadows across the brewery. You notice the workers beginning to quiet down, exchanging soft words and stretching tired limbs. The day's heat fades, replaced by a gentle evening chill that seeps through the mud brick walls. You find a quiet spot by a vat, dipping your fingers into the cool beer and lifting it to your lips. It's rough, grainy, and faintly sweet, the taste of history itself. You close your eyes for a moment, letting the flavors and sounds lull you toward rest. As twilight deepens, the brewery begins to take on a different character. The fading sunlight casts a soft amber glow over the mud brick walls, while shadows stretch and mingle like ancient spirits waking from slumber. You settle down near the fermenting vats, feeling the cool evening breeze brush against your skin, carrying the faint scent of barley and river water. The old man is already recounting another tale, this time about the goddess Atha herself, said to have taught humanity the sacred art of brewing. According to legend, she gifted beer as a divine blessing, meant to bring joy, fertility, and good fortune. You listen closely, picturing the golden-haired goddess smiling benevolently as she poured out endless jugs of frothy brew. You probably won't survive a night in ancient Egypt without sharing a few pints of this stuff, the old man jokes, his voice low and warm, perfect for this sleepy hour. You chuckle quietly but admit you wouldn't mind trying. Nearby, a few temple workers begin to prepare a modest feast, flatbreads, salted fish, and a little honeyed fruit, all intended to accompany the evening's beer-drinking rituals. You inhale deeply, savoring the simple, earthy aromas that mingle with the lingering scent of yeast and grain. Historians still argue whether these feasts were everyday occurrences or reserved strictly for religious festivals and special ceremonies. You suspect, given the laughter and gentle clinking of cups around you, that a bit of both was true. As darkness fully envelops the brewery, flickering oil lamps are lit, their flames casting dancing shadows across the courtyard. The mellow glow illuminates faces worn by toil but softened by contentment. You feel a strange kinship with these people, connected by the timeless ritual of brewing and sharing beer. The old man raises his cup one last time and murmurs a quiet toast to Atha, a reminder that even in the humblest moments, a touch of the divine lingers. You take a slow sip, the familiar grainy bitterness mingling with the sweet hint of dates, and feel your eyelids grow heavy. Tonight, this ancient brew will not only nourish your body but gently carry you toward peaceful dreams. The morning light creeps gently over the horizon as you awaken within the cool, stone walls of the brewery's dormitory. The air smells faintly of molten earth, a subtle reminder that the work continues even as the world stirs to life. You stretch out, muscles still pleasantly sore from yesterday's labor, and listen to the soft murmur of preparations beginning anew. You join the others in the courtyard, where the first tasks of the day are underway. Grain is being sifted carefully through woven baskets, separating chaff from precious kernels with practiced ease. The rhythmic sound is soothing, almost hypnotic, a slow dance of patience and precision. The old man ambles over, balancing a small wooden bowl filled with crushed emmer wheat. He explains how the grains need to be softened before malting, often soaked in the Nile's cool waters overnight. This process activates enzymes necessary to convert starches into sugars, a kind of ancient alchemy that sets the stage for fermentation. You dip your fingers into the bowl, feeling the damp, gritty texture, and imagine the thousands of years this method has endured. Despite advances in brewing, some elements remain unchanged, a testament to the careful observation and ingenuity of Egypt's early brews. There's a light breeze carrying the distant sounds of temple bells, signaling the start of daily rituals. The brewery workers exchange nods and soft greetings, a shared understanding that their work is both practical and sacred. Historians still debate whether brewing was primarily a domestic art or a temple monopoly, with evidence supporting both views. You sense that the truth lies somewhere in the overlap, where community and spirituality intertwine. As you assist in turning piles of soaked grain, a playful argument breaks out about which god prefers the stronger brew, Seth, the god of chaos, or Osiris, lord of the afterlife. You smile at the idea that even divine preferences can inspire friendly debates. By mid-morning, the aroma of malt fills the air, thick and comforting. You realize that brewing is more than just a craft, it's a quiet ceremony that binds people, gods, and the land together in gentle harmony. The day wears on, and the soft sounds of brewing fill the air like a lullaby. You move alongside the workers as they spread malted grain on woven mats to dry beneath the sun, their hands steady and sure despite the warmth pressing down. The grains glisten faintly, tiny golden jewels capturing sunlight. You pause to run your fingers through the spread barley, feeling its delicate roughness, a tactile reminder of the slow, deliberate nature of this ancient craft. The air hums with the buzz of insects and the occasional call of a distant bird, all part of the timeless symphony that accompanies the brewing process. Nearby, a woman hums a low tune, her voice soft but steady, as she turns the grain carefully to ensure even drying. You wonder how many generations before her sang these same melodies, their voices carried on the Nile's breeze. The old man joins you with a small basket filled with wild herbs, mint, coriander, and a few others whose names escape you. He explains that brewers sometimes added these during fermentation to subtly alter flavor and perhaps ward off spoilage. The practice wasn't universal, but it gave certain batches a distinctive character. Historians still argue whether these herbs were used more for taste or medicinal purposes, leaving plenty of room for speculation. You imagine the ancient brewers experimenting with different combinations, guided by instinct and a touch of hope. A young apprentice approaches, curious about your presence, and you share a quiet smile. He points out the rows of clay vessels awaiting filling, their surfaces etched with neat hieroglyphs, a form of labeling that ensured each batch was accounted for. The work continues as the sun climbs higher, the heat growing steady but never unbearable thanks to gentle river breezes. You catch yourself daydreaming about the first sip of finished beer, already imagining its grainy, slightly sour taste mingling with the sweetness of dates. As afternoon shadows stretch long once more, you realize this slow rhythm, this steady patience, is as much a part of brewing as the grain and water themselves. It's a quiet dance of time and care, one that has soothed generations and still offers comfort today. As the sun dips toward the horizon, casting a warm amber glow over the mud-brick walls, the brewery quiets to a gentle hum. You find yourself lingering by the large fermentation vats, watching the pale foam bubble softly, like tiny, restless clouds captured in amber liquid. The smell is richer now, a heady mix of malt, yeast, and faint fruity notes. The old man joins you, his eyes twinkling with a secret knowledge. You know, he says, some say that beer was so important it was used to pay temple workers, soldiers, and even scribes. Imagine getting your salary in something you could drink. You laugh softly, imagining the payroll line turning into a tavern queue. You learn that the brewery also played a role in festivals, where large quantities of beer were brewed to honor gods like Osiris and Athor. These occasions were filled with song, dance, and storytelling, moments of shared joy wrapped in the sacred. Historians still debate how much these celebrations influenced brewing techniques. Did the need to produce vast quantities spur innovation, or did ritual preserve ancient methods? The answer remains as elusive as the final foam on a freshly poured cup. Nearby, a young woman stirs a vat, adding a handful of crushed dates to the mixture. The sweetness mingles with the sourness, creating a balance both delicate and robust. You note how every batch carries subtle differences, like a fingerprint left by its maker. As darkness falls, oil lamps flicker on, casting a golden light that dances across smiling faces. The brewery feels alive, a place where craft and community intertwine beneath the watchful eyes of the gods. You take a slow sip of the brew, its grainy texture and gentle warmth settling deep inside. It's more than a drink, it's a thread connecting past and present, a whispered story told in bubbles and barley. Night deepens around the brewery, wrapping the courtyard in velvety darkness punctuated by flickering lamp flames. The air cools, and the sound soften to murmurs and gentle footsteps. You lean against a worn mud-brick wall, feeling the weight of centuries in the stillness around you. The old man settles nearby, sharing tales of the peculiar vessels once used to store beer, ceramic jars shaped like animals, gods, and even mythical creatures. Some were purely decorative, while others bore inscriptions meant to invoke blessings on the brew. You imagine the care and reverence that went into each piece, turning everyday containers into sacred art. You probably won't find a cooler beer stein than a hippo-shaped jar, he jokes, making you smile in the quiet night. Such vessels remind you that brewing was as much about storytelling as it was about science. The brewery's workers prepare for rest, but a few remain tending the fermentation vats, monitoring the slow transformation from grain mash to liquid gold. The process is delicate, too much heat or disturbance could spoil the batch. You appreciate the care this requires, a mindful patience that feels almost meditative. Historians still argue whether the ancient Egyptians had techniques to control fermentation temperature or relied entirely on nature's timing. You suspect a bit of both, mixed with trial and error across generations. Nearby, a small offering of beer and bread rests at a shrine to Atha, placed there to honor the goddess who inspired this ancient craft. You take a moment to reflect on how intertwined faith and daily life were in this world, how even a simple drink held sacred meaning. As your eyes grow heavy, the gentle night sounds, rustling palms, distant water lapping, soft murmurs, wrap around you like a lullaby. The story of ancient beer is not just about thirst or flavor but about connection to the earth, the gods, and each other. The dawn breaks softly over the horizon, painting the sky with gentle hues of pink and gold. You awaken to the familiar scent of barley and freshly baked bread wafting through the air, a comforting embrace after a restful night. The brewery stirs quietly, workers moving with calm purpose as the new day begins. Today, the focus turns to the final stage of brewing, straining the fermented mash to extract the precious beer. You watch as the liquid is carefully poured through woven reed filters into large clay jars, the amber liquid catching the morning light like captured sunshine. The old man explains how this step was crucial to remove grain husks and sediment, making the drink smoother and more enjoyable. Yet, the resulting beer still retains a hearty texture, a reminder of its humble origins. You notice that some jars are marked with symbols denoting their intended use, some for temple rituals, others for everyday consumption. The distinction is subtle but important, reflecting the bee's dual role as sacred offering and daily nourishment. Historians still debate whether the beer served in temples was brewed differently or simply set aside from common batches. You imagine both practices coexisting, each with its own rituals and reverence. Nearby, children gather to watch the process, their eyes wide with fascination and excitement. The brewery feels like a living classroom, where tradition and community flow together as naturally as the beer itself. You take a slow sip from a freshly poured cup, savoring the slightly sweet, malty flavor mingled with a hint of earthiness. It's a taste that transcends time, a quiet bridge connecting you to the ancient world. As the day warms, the brewery hums with gentle activity, a place where patience, care, and ancient knowledge combine to create something simple yet extraordinary, a gift from the gods and a comfort to the people. The afternoon sun casts long, lazy shadows across the brewery courtyard, the heat mellowing into a gentle warmth that soothes your skin. You join the workers as they carefully seal the clay jars with palm fronds and mud, ensuring the beer is protected from dust and pests as it matures. The ritual is unhurried, each step performed with the kind of mindful attention that comes from years of practice. You notice how these seals often bore symbols and prayers, invoking the protection of gods like Biz, the jovial guardian of households and brewing alike. It's a small, comforting gesture, an ancient way to invite good fortune and ward off spoilage. The old man chuckles softly, telling you that some brewers believed Biz's laughter could keep bad spirits from souring the beer. You can't help but smile at the idea of a divine watchdog guarding the brewery, wagging his tail over bubbling vats. Nearby, a group of women chat quietly while weaving palm baskets to carry the jars, their hands swift and sure. You watch the interplay of light and shadow on their faces, the peaceful camaraderie a soothing counterpoint to the day's work. Historians still debate whether brewing was primarily a male or female domain in ancient Egypt, with evidence suggesting both genders played important roles at different times and places. This ambiguity adds a rich layer to the story, reminding you that history is rarely as simple as it seems. As evening approaches, the first stars twinkle faintly overhead, and the brewery settles into a gentle hush. You sip from a small cup, feeling the familiar warmth and grainy texture soothe your throat. It's a quiet moment, one that connects you not only to these ancient brewers but to countless others who found comfort in this humble drink. The cycle continues, a timeless dance of nature, craft, and devotion that flows as steadily as the Nile itself. The moon rises high, bathing the brewery in its soft silver light. You feel the cool night air settle around you as the sounds of crickets and distant water gently fill the silence. The day's work is done, but your thoughts linger on the fascinating details you've uncovered, how brewing beer was woven into the very fabric of ancient Egyptian life. You recall the elaborate process of malting, mashing, and fermenting, the sacred role of the gods, and the delicate balance between craft and faith. It all seems so peaceful now, this ritual passed down through generations, a gentle thread connecting past and present. The old man shares a quiet story about the use of beer in funerary rites, how the deceased were often provided with jars of their favorite brew to enjoy in the afterlife. The idea is both comforting and strangely tender, a reminder that even death was met with familiar comforts. Historians still argue whether these provisions were symbolic or practical, but either way, the presence of beer in tombs speaks to its deep cultural significance. You imagine ancient souls raising their cups in quiet celebration beyond the veil. Nearby, a small fire crackles softly as some brewers gather for a brief rest, their laughter low and easy. The camaraderie feels timeless, a gentle reminder that behind every ancient tradition are real people, people who laughed, shared stories, and found solace in simple pleasures. You take a final sip of the cooling brew, its grainy sweetness lingering like a whispered promise. As your eyelids grow heavy, you realize this isn't just a story about beer, it's a story about connection, patience, and the quiet joys that make life worth savoring. The night wraps around you like a soft blanket, and the gentle murmur of the brewery fades into a soothing hum. The early morning light filters softly through woven mats hanging over the windows, casting dappled patterns on the stone floor. You wake to the familiar scent of malt and fermenting grain, a gentle reminder that the cycle of brewing is beginning anew. The quiet hustle of the brewery feels like a comforting heartbeat beneath the stillness of dawn. Today, you observe how brewers carefully document their batches, using hieroglyphs to record dates, ingredients, and intended uses. These ancient notes act as a kind of recipe book, passed down and refined through generations, a silent dialogue between brewers separated by time. The old man points out a particularly intricate symbol, explaining that it likely indicated a special ceremonial brew, perhaps reserved for a festival honoring Atha, goddess of joy and music. The precision and artistry of these markings fascinate you, revealing how even early record-keeping blended function and beauty. Historians still debate how widespread literacy was among brewers, but the existence of these records suggests at least some had the skills to carefully track their craft. You imagine apprentices learning to read and write not just for communication, but to honor the sacred tradition of brewing. Nearby, you hear the faint sound of a harp being tuned, a soothing melody that drifts through the brewery and seems to wrap itself around the very air you breathe. The music feels like an invisible thread tying work and worship together, lifting spirits and soothing tired muscles. As you sip from a fresh cup of beer, the grainy taste mingled with a subtle sweetness feels like a warm handshake from history, a quiet invitation to slow down, breathe deeply, and savor the moment. The sun rises fully now, and the brewery hums with life once more, a timeless dance of craft, care, and celebration that continues just as it did thousands of years ago. The sun begins its slow descent, casting long, lazy shadows across the bustling streets of ancient Memphis. You stroll back to the brewery, where the evening's tasks are underway with a calm rhythm. The air is tinged with the rich scent of malt and fermenting grain, soothing your senses after a long day. You watch as workers carefully transfer the freshly brewed beer into smaller containers for distribution, their movements unhurried yet purposeful. The jars are sealed with palm fronds and mud, each marked with symbols indicating destination, temples, homes, markets, each vessel a quiet ambassador of this ancient craft. The old man recounts tales of how beer was woven into everyday life, from simple family meals to grand temple festivals. He mentions that some families even brewed their own batches at home, a practice that connected neighbors and strengthened communities. Historians still argue whether home brewing was as widespread as temple or state production, but the idea of families gathering to craft their own beer adds a warm, personal touch to the story. You imagine the laughter and shared stories over steaming cups, the gentle clinking of pottery a soundtrack to daily life. Nearby, children play under the watchful eyes of their parents, their joyful shouts blending with the softer hum of the brewery. The scene feels timeless, a reminder that behind every ancient tradition are living, breathing people, sharing moments both ordinary and sacred. As the evening deepens, you take a slow sip of the grainy, slightly sweet beer, feeling its warmth spread gently through you. It's a simple pleasure, yet profound, a reminder that some comforts endure across millennia, quietly linking us to those who came before. The fading light wraps the brewery in a gentle embrace, and you feel yourself drifting toward rest, carried on the steady current of this ancient, soothing story. The night settles softly over the Nile, stars twinkling like distant fires in the vast Egyptian sky. You find yourself once again at the heart of the brewery, where the day's final tasks are complete, and the quiet hum of fermentation fills the air like a gentle lullaby. You reflect on the journey you've taken, through sunlit courtyards and moonlit nights, alongside brewers whose hands and hearts shaped a drink that nourished gods and people alike. The story of ancient Egyptian beer is one of patience, reverence, and connection, woven through centuries like the threads of a finely crafted tapestry. The old man's voice is soft now, sharing one last tale about how some brewers believed their beer carried the spirit of the Nile itself, a gift from the river goddess that brought life and joy. It's a beautiful thought, that something as simple as a humble drink could hold such profound meaning. Historians still debate many details of this ancient craft, but what remains clear is the deep bond between people, place, and practice, a bond that continues to inspire and soothe today. As your eyelids grow heavy, the soft night sounds of the brewery, rustling palms, distant water, gentle laughter, wrap around you like a warm blanket. You feel a sense of peace, carried on the steady flow of history and the quiet magic of a story well told. Now, as you prepare to drift off, let the steady pulse of the Nile and the gentle craft of ancient brewers guide you into a restful sleep, wrapped in the timeless comfort of connection and care. Slow now, the pace eases as you sink deeper into comfort. The warmth of ancient sunlit stones fades softly into the cool embrace of night. Your breath lengthens, gentle and steady, as the world around you quiets into a soothing hush. The soft murmur of water lapping at distant riverbanks blends with a faint rustling of palms, weaving a lullaby just for you. Remember the grain, the gentle stirring hands, and the laughter shared beneath the stars, small moments of joy that ripple through time like gentle waves. These are the threads connecting you to a long line of quiet creators, dreamers, and lovers of simple pleasures. Let your mind float gently, carried by the steady current of history and the soft pulse of the Nile's gift. Rest easy now, cradled by a story told in whispers, bubbles, and golden light.